All right, crim 1. Let's get into chapter 2, which covers the types of crimes. There we go. One of the really important things that sometimes we don't always think about is the fact that it's really important to measure crime. And there are a lot of reasons for this. We need to know, as a community, as citizens, we need to know how much crime is taking place in our communities, our areas, our neighborhoods. But it's also really important for law enforcement agencies to know, like, for example, let's say there was a spike in vehicle thefts near Fresno City College. It would be important for the police to know that so that they could better prepare for it, hopefully prevent it, maybe come up with some different types of patrolling techniques to reduce the uptick in crime in that area. So anyways, it's super important to know how much crime is taking place, where it's taking place, and how to effectively handle it. So how do we do that? Measure it, I mean. The Uniform Crime Report is probably the most common or widely accepted tool in order for us, the community, to know how much crime is taking place in particular areas. So it is an annual service that is put together by the FBI. What happens is every law enforcement agency in the United States is required to report all of their solved crimes to the FBI. So every law enforcement agency has their little packets of information. I would just, even for probation, when we used to arrest people into juvenile hall, I was typically working with kids, there was a purple DOJ form that was going to the Uniform Crime Report, and we had to do that purple form every time a person was arrested in juvenile hall. And all that data is sent to the FBI from every law enforcement agency, and the FBI puts all that information together and provides an annual report of how much crime there has been. So the Uniform Crime Report is the first tool that we're talking about in order to measure crime. So again, that was from the FBI. It is reported and solved crimes only, and every law enforcement agency is required to turn those in. So there are some pros and cons to that. I really should go back to this slide. There are some pros and cons to this. The Uniform Crime Report is really accurate at measuring the crime that is solved. And again, I'm going to say that a couple times, and I know I'm saying it slowly. It's important. That is a significant drawback to the Uniform Crime Report, is that it only addresses solved or cleared crimes. If you can imagine, the vast majority of crime is probably, or at least half of it, is probably not reported. I usually do this in class. I ask the students how many of them have had something stolen from them in their life. And, generally speaking, about half the students are going to raise their hands. Then I'll go on to ask the question, how many of you reported it to the police? And very few actually report it, for many reasons. Some people don't report crime because they are afraid of retaliation. Maybe they're illegal immigrants and they're afraid that they're going to get deported. Maybe they were committing a crime when they were victimized. Maybe they don't trust the police. Maybe they don't think it's worth their time to call the police. So there's a bunch of reasons. So when looking at the Uniform Crime Report, it's super accurate, but it only addresses solved crimes. And we know that so many crimes go unreported and unsolved. So it's kind of a good snapshot of what's taking place on a much smaller scale than it actually is. I hope that makes sense. Okay, other ways to measure crime. National Crime Victimization Survey is one of them. This is basically it's a survey that is sent out to just average people, not necessarily people that are defined as victims, but average people. Let's say they came to me and said, Fernandez, we want to survey all of your classes. and ask them if they've been the victim of crime. So these surveys will ask questions about whether or not whoever is taking the survey has been the victim of crime and whether or not that crime was reported. Somebody's at my door. And whether or not they have been reported. So what they're really looking for here with the National Crime Victimization Survey is for people to come forward and admit, I guess is the best word to describe it, that they've been a victim of a crime, whether or not that crime has been reported to law enforcement. These are confidential surveys, so nobody has to report anything. They don't give their names, any of that kind of stuff. So it might be a more accurate way to get information from victims. However, it also, as they say, people could potentially be dishonest when completing the National Crime Victimization Survey. But the hope is that those conducting the survey with the NCVS are going to find out about more crime that has taken place and has not been reported. Okay, self-report studies are another tool that is used to measure crime. These are really similar to the National Crime Victimization Survey, except the questions asked on those surveys will be for the person taking the survey to admit whether or not they have actually been arrested for a crime, whether it was reported or not. So you have the same kind of pros and cons to this. Sometimes you're going to find out about more crime that has taken place that hasn't been reported. You also have to consider that sometimes people are dishonest, even in these types of surveys. It is also a confidential survey, so anyway, so those are probably the three big ones: the Uniform Crime Report, self-report studies, and the National Crime Victimization Survey. These are all tools for us to measure crime. So this chapter also talks about a little bit about the types of crimes. So crimes against persons. These are typically going to be violent crimes. That word did not want to come out of my mouth for some reason. So violent crime rates have dropped from 1994 to 2017. And the 1990s were a very violent time. I always say, and I know that people laugh at me when I say it, but the crack era was crazy. And that was during the 1990s. There was a lot of violence during that time. So who is most likely to be victimized? A lot of us probably would not answer this question right, but it is going to be a young male of color, typically African American. So they are more likely to be victimized than anyone else. And a lot of times women think that, we women think that we are more likely to be victims of crime, but statistically that's not true. Young black males are typically the ones. So let's move on to homicide or murder. Homicide is a medical term that indicates that one person was killed at the hands of another person. There are times when homicide can be legal. Let's say in self-defense. If some school shooter comes running into my classroom and I have a gun and I shoot and kill that person who is trying to kill me and my students, that would still be considered homicide. The shooter died at my hands. However, homicide is not always illegal, okay? Murder is illegal. You have to have the intent for murder. First and second degree murder are listed here. Typically, first degree murder is something that's planned with malice aforethought, as they say in the Penal Code book. And second degree murder is not necessarily planned, so that's kind of the difference between the two. First degree murder, generally speaking, your sentence for that would be 25 to life, whereas second degree is usually 15 to life. Manslaughter could be voluntary, involuntary, vehicular, or negligent. So generally speaking, manslaughter is a crime of lesser responsibility. If you think vehicular manslaughter, if you were texting and driving and clearly breaking the law by texting and driving and you hit and killed somebody, that would probably be a vehicular manslaughter. Doesn't mean you necessarily meant to kill the person, but there are different levels of intent here. And then moving on to other types of homicide, we have serial murderers, mass murders, and spree murders. And a serial murderer is someone like Jeffrey Dahmer, who killed numerous people over many years. Mass murder is generally when a lot of people are killed at the same time in the same place. So think school shooting, which of course we don't want to think about, but that's kind of what that is. And then we have a spree murder, which is similar to a mass murder. However, those crimes are taking place in different locations. And we do see this a lot of times, that maybe a spree murderer will kill his family first and then move on to his workplace, his or her workplace, and then kill people there as well. So that is the difference between all of those. Other types of violent crime: battery. Really, that's any kind of unlawful touching. Sexual assault, rape, and molestation, all clearly violent crimes. Robbery. Robbery is a tough one because a lot of people get robbery and burglary confused. They are not the same thing. A robbery is when something is taken from another person by force or fear. That can include a weapon or not, but robbery is a violent crime, a personal crime. And we're going to get on to burglary in the next slide. But so I want to make sure that you know the difference. Robbery is a serious violent felony, and it is when you come home after a long weekend away and your house is cleaned out because someone came in and stole everything. That is not a robbery. There was no force or fear. They just came and stole all your stuff. It still sucks, but it's not a robbery. Child abuse, of course, is a violent crime, and kidnapping is, generally speaking, a violent crime. I'm pretty sure you know child. I think you know what these things are, but if you don't, you can check in the book. Property crimes, different. I'm going to go back. Violent crimes, property crimes. Okay, property crimes are, according to your book, had dropped since 1994. Statistics or more recent data in the state of California has shown an uptick in property crimes. Burglary. So this is when a person maybe goes into your house, maybe goes into your place of employment, maybe breaks into your car and steals something. Larceny, kind of the same, basically the same kind of thing. Someone that is taking property from someone else. Vehicle theft, that's what we are unfortunately known for that in the Fresno area, but that's when someone steals someone else's vehicle. And then we have white collar crime. It's just also considered a property crime because generally speaking they're just stealing, just like how I justified that, they're stealing money. So these things can also be misdemeanors or felonies depending on the amount of the property that is stolen. Moving on, public order crimes. These are sometimes called victimless crimes, so or crimes against morality, like prostitution, gambling, even drug offenses. Some of us would say that, prostitution is not that big a deal. Who's the victim, really? I'm not saying that that's my argument. I'm just saying that some people would say that. So prostitution, gambling, for example. Again, is there a victim when a person is gambling? And again, some could argue, a long way around. Typically if someone's gambling, then they're losing money. And then even using drugs. In the 1980s, launched the, actually it was the Nancy Reagan, that's who it was. Nancy Reagan and Ronald Reagan launched the war on drugs. It was unfortunately completely unsuccessful, and we are still absolutely struggling with the sales, distribution, and death involved with the drug trade. Political crimes, immigration offenses, and then politicians using their office for personal use or gain. This is unfortunately also very common. And let's see, stalking. The willful, malicious, repeated following or harassing of another person. This did not used to be a crime. Like when I was young, probably your age-ish, this was not a crime. Stalking became a crime only after a lot of, unfortunately, mostly women were murdered by people who had been stalking them. So it makes them feel unsafe. This is a crime dominated by men, and most stalkers eventually assault the targeted individual. So stalking can be in person, online, when a person is being followed and or harassed by another person. And here are some statistics in stalking. Again, it's dominated by men until we get to the spouse or ex-spouse. So anyways, I just thought these were some interesting statistics. But that's it for chapter 2. We'll move on to chapter 3 next.